Hello, I wanted to talk a little bit about what to expect from an intake appointment with a mental health therapist if you've never had one before. It's generally pretty straightforward, but we'll break it down so you have a little bit of an idea of what to expect. Usually the first thing that you're going to encounter is all of the intake paperwork. So that's going to look like consent for treatment, informed consent, maybe a cancellation policy if they have one. There's usually a consent for telehealth, a consent for electronic exchange, and to just briefly go through what each of those is. A consent for treatment basically talks about the rights and responsibilities that you have as a client and that your therapist has as a therapist. That includes how the relationship might end if something goes wrong in treatment or you get referred out or progress isn't being made. It sort of talks a little bit about what to expect in that end. Informed consent ends up talking about the rights and the limitations that you have for confidentiality. A broad version of this is saying that you have complete confidentiality when you're in the session with the therapist and outside of the session, as long as what it is that you're saying isn't jeopardizing you or somebody else's immediate safety. Therapists in, I believe, all states are mandated reporters, which means they're required to report any suspected child abuse or neglect that they infer is happening as a result of what it is that you're telling them. So if you're not an immediate danger to yourself or others, confidentiality is maintained. If no child is being endangered, confidentiality is maintained. I usually also give the preamble that if somebody is thinking about hurting themselves, that doesn't mean that I'm going to be trying to make some sort of a call to try to arrange some sort of intervention or that the police are going to show up at your house. If you believe that you might try to hurt yourself or that you're thinking about that, I want people to be able to tell me about that. And if we can come up with plans for being able to prevent those kinds of things from happening, that's part of what I'm here for. If it ends up being the case that I'm going to hang up and I'm going to go jump off of my balcony and there is nothing that you can do about it and I won't see you tomorrow, that's a different kind of a ball game, and then your therapist can break confidentiality in order to try to keep you safe or to try to keep somebody else safe. Therapists are often able to communicate with hospitals. If you end up there and you're in an emergent situation that requires immediate transmission of information between you and the hospital in order to keep you safe, it's also part of the rights and limitations of confidentiality. And then there's consents for telehealth exchange if you're going to use video platforms, and whether or not your therapist uses texts to be able to communicate with their clients. Oftentimes you won't see this in clinics where there's just too many people, but you may see that in private practice if somebody owns their own clinic or they have a small group practice that they work at. Oftentimes the therapist will give you a phone number that you can text for being able to make appointment updates or to be able to send information through. There's usually a little bit of a pre-screening form for what kind of symptoms that you're experiencing, and it can be helpful for the therapist to be able to have some of that information filled out in advance. However, they're usually going to be conducting what's called a biopsychosocial interview with you to be able to get several questions answered by the end of the intake. If you're going into an intake and you're like, man, what am I going to tell this person, or what kind of questions are they going to ask? It's largely going to be coming from a biopsychosocial assessment, and there's going to be several different areas that are typically screened for. So there's usually mental health symptoms, there's going to be substance use that's present or not present. If there are specific traumatic instances or something that's happened in your history that's important to know. If there's some sort of a physical health condition that's either augmenting your mental health or is important to know for the broader context of what it is that you're going through. Are there any legal or financial factors that are causing distress or would be important to know or would inform treatment? One of the reasons we screen for these is because that can sometimes indicate increased level of risk. Like for instance, if somebody has a gambling problem and they have severe financial debt, that may increase the person's chances of lethality or hurting themselves or giving up on things. So sometimes a therapist will screen for that depending on your situation. We'll ask for cultural references if there's something spiritually, culturally, religiously, ethnically that's important for us to know about what's going on in your experience, or how to contextualize what your experience looks like and feels like from the inside, what your social health is like, so your contact with your family member, friends, partners, other communities that you belong to, and perhaps if there are historical events that are important in any of those categories that are going to help to inform treatment. And finally, we'll do a lethality assessment, which I covered a little bit in confidentiality, but most therapists will have that built into their intake appointment to ask about, like, have you ever thought about hurting yourself or somebody else? And go through a couple of follow-up questions to be able to make sure that you're set up for success and that you're going to be safe enough to receive treatment with them. It's important to be honest about that, because what can happen is if you hide that, it can end up being that you end up telling a large portion of your story, and then if you get to that point 9 or 10 sessions in, after you've already built a huge relationship with this person, but then you require a whole lot more help than they're able to offer or feel comfortable offering if they're in private practice, or it's a telehealth appointment, or something like this where they really want you to have a treatment team around you. You'd like to be able to spell that out clearly in advance to make sure that they're going to have the facilities, the techniques, and the resources to be able to help you without sidetracking your journey. Depending on the therapist, treatment planning starts at intake, and the therapist may start to create a treatment plan based off of what you told them, how it is that they might be able to help, and they'll ask you to help them to come up with goals that are going to outline those different interventions for how to move treatment forward and what the various milestones and steps are going to look like along the course of treatment. We also like to say that discharge starts at intake, which is we're trying to figure out, like, we're planning for this to succeed, we're planning for you to leave one day, and this is what it looks like, so that you have some clear expectations in advance, as opposed to it just sort of being this wandering, open-ended thing, and I guess we'll figure it out later. You don't want that kind of experience. I hope that helps to dispel some of the mysteries of what some of that paperwork actually means if you usually just skip through it, or it looks intimidating to read all of the fine print through. And it gives you a little bit of an idea of maybe some of the questions to ask yourself, that out of each one of those topics, are there a few of those that stand out as the key highlights that would be important to be able to tell a therapist in advance if you've got an hour to be able to tell them something in an intake appointment. And usually an intake is 60 minutes. Sometimes it's up to 90 depending on the setting that you're in, but it's usually a 60-minute appointment. Thank you so much. Stay tuned for more.